When MiHoYo rebranded into the more all-encompassing HoYoverse, I knew that something was up. I mean, their most popular title by far, before Genshin was ever a glimmer in the eye, is full of a constant theme. There are countless universes, pocket dimensions, or more colloquially as Honkai puts it, bubble universes, and any bizarre and plot device-heavy possible combination you can imagine, and they're all more or less canon. In Honkai, through events and main story modes, you're under a constant barrage of anything anywhere could be possible, and it's likely happening in a parallel universe as we speak, once reaching a certain point in the story. So, what does that mean for us Genshin lore nerds? A lot, it turns out. I came to Honkai in the beginning almost entirely looking for those hinted at connections. The first and most poignant of them being the main story moment when Auto Apocalypse glimpses Dvalin through the imaginary tree, confirming without a doubt, though the internet rants and rages against this fact, that the two games share a connection, at least in the wider multiverse. The devs have said that the two games exist on the same branch of existence on the imaginary tree in the Sea of Quanta. So, what does that mean? Honestly, the implications skyrocket to mind-blowing pretty fast once you start to look even slightly beneath the surface. With this determination in hand, I started a brand new Honkai account after years of idling off and on, and started to devour the story with gusto. I think it's silly to call the theories surrounding Project Arc specifically far-fetched or unrealistic. Whatever, I'm throwing all of that out and I'm going full tinfoil hat for this one. Sometimes, in order to arrive at the truth, you have to look at even the most outlandish possibilities. I've seen many cases of things that very serious lore buffs in many different fandoms thought couldn't possibly turn out to be canon only for them to become beloved main story mainstays. These kinds of things are more common than you think, so I believe that even looking at the most outlandish connections can be beneficial. I'm covering some things that other theorists have, as well as some things they haven't. In a lot of cases, I feel like no one was digging as deep as I'd like them to. For instance, many theories about Project Arc miss a very important point that's a bit buried in the lore, that being the one living person who left Earth on the Ark. I'm going to cover that in depth. My main disclaimer is, of course, for spoilers through the whole of Honkai 3rd's main story right up until the most recent chapter about the origin of the moon, as well as up to possibly 3.4 in Genshin Impact's main story. My second disclaimer is that despite my natural attention to detail and connections, even with this in mind and the copious amount of time I've spent in the last few weeks digging through Honkai, there's likely stuff I've missed. I'm not quite at the expert level I've managed to become with regard to Genshin. Please keep that in mind and remember that I like to present things I find to you in order to give you more things to think about so that you can reach your own conclusions. My only hope is that any of this manages to come across as slightly more than gibberish. I also want to suggest that you pause here and give the official introduction to the Honkai universe video a quick watch if you're completely new to Honkai. I will leave a link in the description below for easy access. I'm Ganymede of the Hexen Zircle, and I'm going to try to piece together the shattered pieces of these universes one step at a time. I'll start with the most obvious and stunning connection. The Hersher of the Void. The beginning of Honkai's story speedruns its way into showing you what a Hersher is, by revealing that the main character is one. Kiana Kaslana's destiny is inescapable, and the Hersher's supposed persona haunts and taunts her from her dreams at first, before becoming more and more difficult to fight. When a person becomes a Hersher, generally speaking, they become overwhelmed with a hatred for humanity, often spurred on by the human vessel's own emotional pain and suffering. The Honkai corruption preys on the ways they have been harmed by others, slowly trying to warp them into believing that humanity deserves to be obliterated. There's a lot of in-universe wibbly-wobbliness with this concept that gets played at different levels of extreme for many different characters to better serve their roles in the story, so this is an extremely simplified explanation, keep that in mind. So, the real elephant in the room is the Hersher of the Void herself. She bears an undeniable resemblance to the unknown god from the very first cutscene in Genshin Impact. From her moveset to the presence of her strange glowing blocks and her abilities, to the way she makes her first appearance. The other thing that gets me is that the unknown god's left arm appears to be corrupted in a way that is really similar to the appearance of Honkai corruption as its marks appear on someone. The other Honkai XPs in Genshin generally have some connections to their former Honkai Impact selves, while never being 100% on the mark. So it makes me wonder what we will inevitably learn about this entity, and how similar she may have once been to Kiana. Or maybe this is the one case where she simply is an incarnation of the character she appears as, serving as the bridge between these universes. The 3 star shapes that appear to be a tear in space that she arrives through do bear a resemblance to the Hersher of Corruption's core as it appeared in the final battle in the Elysian Realm. What significance this has remains to be seen, as the 2 Hershers have little connection to each other in Honkai. I'd like to take the moment to point out that this symbol also appears though partially hidden in the Dragon Spine mural. What it is meant to represent remains a mystery, though it could very well just represent the Enforcer of Heavenly Principles herself, watching from a distance and hidden, always present but out of sight. This is all interesting because overcoming and gaining control of the Honkai's genocidal desires is an important part of Kiana's character arc, even though it turns out that the current era's Hershers are dealing with something else entirely and it's not possession or another persona. That's a long and irrelevant explanation. And the way that the unknown god addresses the travelers and speaks is not terribly like either Kiana or Syrian's personality. If it was just purely the Hersher of the Void in another time, there would have probably been a lot more taunting and deranged giggling. So we have this big riddle to ponder for the foreseeable future, as we all know this is one that won't be directly faced until we near the end of our Genshin Impact journey. We still ask, is she the second who came, a shade of the original primordial one? Does it have any tie to the twins' character info that states, the Keeper is fading and the Creator has yet to arrive? The Imaginary Tree and the Sea of Quanta. Auto-Apocalypse is the main antagonist of a good leg of the story of Honkai, though most of his villainy was done in the name of love, making him a beloved ancient sad man to most fans. During what would be part of his last big move on the stage, he made brief contact with Teyvat through the Imaginary Tree and witnessed Dvalin soaring through the sky as he searched through other dimensions. The devs later confirmed that this was in fact Dvalin from Genshin, though Dvalin bears a striking resemblance to Benares, aka Bella, a Honkai dragon and servant to the Hersher of the Void. Even without Otto's direct interaction with Teyvat, I would have considered their resemblance enough of a connection to note. This Honkai dragon also appears multiple times in the Elysian Realm as a boss fight during the Flame Chaser trials, which I find significant as I believe the Elysian Realm's data is key to Teyvat's creation, but more on that later. Now, the most important thing this tells us is that Honkai and Genshin Impact are happening in the same wider universe, or universes. This is a difficult thing to label within the world of Honkai, as it is quite famously full of alternate universes and the like. Let's just sum it up by saying that this is confirmation that the devs are suggesting that they are, no matter how distantly, canon to each other. This is the Hoyoverse, more or less, and likely includes some of their other lesser-known games like Tears of Themis and Gun Girl Z, which also contain references or connections to Genshin, as well as, definitely, Honkai Star Rail, which seems to be taking these cross-game connections to the extreme. So, in order to understand the significance of this, I have to explain the Imaginary Tree and the Sea of Quanta. This is both simple and not. The Imaginary Tree is, well, a thing that exists within the Sea of Quanta. It's more or less identical in appearance to Genshin Impact's Urban Soul, at least as it appeared in Rukkhadevata's memory space. The idea of being able to enter people's projected memories preserved in data is another thing that Honkai is infamous for, and these types of encounters drive a large portion of the main plot. The Imaginary Tree itself is the source of all life. The Imaginary Tree and the Sea of Quanta exist in opposition to each other. They are a perfect representation of the concept of Ouroboros. The Sea of Quanta seeks to flood and overtake the tree, while the tree drinks of the Sea of Quanta, seeking to absorb it entirely. This is a typical chicken or the egg type dilemma, the snake eating its own tail, where these two unfathomable entities need each other to exist while constantly seeking to tip the balance against each other. These concepts are found in many spiritual beliefs throughout the world. Each universe is a leaf upon the Imaginary Tree, and when one is inevitably destroyed by the Honkai and its Hershers, plagues, etc., The leaf withers and falls into the Sea of Quanta, where they remain as fragmented shadow universes, some with more stability and completeness than others. The bubble universes within the Sea of Quanta can be held in place and stabilized by something known as an ether anchor, and are, we know now as of Chapter 34, mostly created when a universe's civilization fails to evolve according to the will of finality or the will of Honkai, and finality then obliterates them. These floating universes can even be created through someone's memories if they're powerful enough, as shown by Kevin Coslana, or even artificially built by hand, though one would need something as powerful as a divine key, as demonstrated by Su's handmade universe, the Seed of Sumeru. More on that later. Autoapocalypse explains what he has come to know about Honkai by saying, Honkai is a corrective system put into place in the tree's rivalry against the Sea of Quanta. It breeds, nurtures, tests, and removes civilizations. This explains Honkai's main function. On Earth in the main story's main universe, it has time and time again arose with what humanity interpreted as the pure and single-minded intention to annihilate all human life, inevitably resetting the Earth back to its Hadean primordial state. When this finally occurred fully 50,000 years ago, it is said that the surface of the Earth was reduced to endless desert and badly irradiated by Honkai energy, making it impossible for life to exist for many, many years. In recent chapters, the question of something known as the will of Honkai has come up again and again, with Raiden Mei having sensed its existence. Understanding the will of Honkai has become one of her driving questions. We finally have the answer, sort of. I'll get to it shortly. And the answer immediately shows us the similarities between what Honkai does to human civilization and the cyclical nature of Tevat's civilizations. I think there has to be some kind of connection there. This reveal also completely upended our understanding of what Honkai even is. From the beginning, the main characters, despite 50,000 years of scattered research they inherited from the previous civilization and their own thousands of years of work to safeguard humanity, only understand that Honkai rises with civilization, and as far as the average human is concerned, once it's all dead. This reveal, however, made us realize that Honkai was not simply acting as a virus or as a program in a computer. Honkai has a will, which the main cast begin to address as Will of Honkai, or the God of Honkai. This is a being from a higher plane of existence that literally is finality. Not the final Herrscher, not the Herrscher of finality, but finality itself. It's important to note here that in recent chapters of the game, it was revealed that the 50,000 year mark is significant not only because it was the last epoch of human civilization before the current one, but that the cocoon of finality, related to the final Herrscher and located on the moon, yeah, we're back to talking about dead husks and moons, big shocker, has more or less trapped humanity in a, and I quote the use of the word, samsara of 50,000 years. Humanity gets 50,000 years to live and thrive, while forced to fight against the various Honkai eruptions sent to test them, and then, if it fails to evolve into higher beings, the Honkai will activate and reset the failed attempt to zero. Another big lore bomb in Chapter 34 tells us that the Herrschers as we know them, mostly with regard to our main cast of ladies who have come to control their Herrscher cores, are in fact only projections of the one true Herrscher core in the cocoon of finality. Think of the dimensions in imaginary space as a prism through which light, Honkai energy, is passing. It manifested as the various gems we know as Herrscher cores. I've also mentioned while talking about the Herrscher of the Void something known as Herrscher personas, and that too was proved to have never actually been a thing. It turns out that the power of a Herrscher core can just make somebody go absolutely bonkers. Raiden Mei was a special case though, and it was the sentient manifestation of her stigma that she struggled against. Stigmata are their own huge can of lore worms on their own, but not super relevant here for now. You can kind of equate them to visions and vision wielders. The important thing that this reveal told us is that Honkai has no control over the Herrschers in the current era, and this is purely due to Elysia's existence and subsequent sacrifice, which I will also detail a bit more later. I know this is a lot, but stick with me. The Herrscher cores are significant to note, because I believe they likely have something to do with the Archon's Gnosises and or visions. If Tevat is some kind of bubble universe that's meant to simulate the whole of the greater universe, this would kind of make sense. A copy of finality existing in Celestia that is the source of light, passing through a prism, breaking off into 7 colors for 7 archons. I digress. Again, one of those things that feels like a connection is right there under the surface, but we just don't have enough information. Anyway, back to Honkai. This all brings us to a conclusion reached by Kevin Caslana after having taken the power of finality for himself, and by Dr. Tesla of anti-entropy. That Honkai's will, its desire, is to force humanity to evolve. Each of the numbered Herschers that appear is another attempt at this so-called embrace, another push, another rigorous test. Finality has the authority of time. This is, of course, very important to us Genshin fans looking in from the outside, specifically because it functions as the judge and jury. So, if the embrace of a Herrscher or Honkai disaster fails to force humanity's evolution, finality eventually resets everything and tries again. Moving on from that, Dr. May, not to be confused with the bizarrely similar and name-sharing Raiden May of the current era, tells us that she believes Honkai is in fact the singular joined will of a vast civilization, and implies that Honkai is in fact an alien civilization beyond humanity's comprehension, seeking to force evolution in lesser races in the cosmos on the branches of the imaginary tree. Its end goal is very likely assimilation, to force the race it's fixated on to a point spiritually, physically, etc., where it can merge with this Honkai hive mind and reach ascendance. Which, honestly, sounds kind of like a terrible deal, and I would not sign up for it. So, let's get back to what the developers have alluded to, that Genshin and Honkai exist within the imaginary tree. The imaginary tree is nearly identical to Irminsul in appearance, and it seems to corroborate the idea that a lot of us have had after dealing with it, that it seems a little too sci-fi to be a coincidence. The imaginary tree stretches down into the Sea of Quanta, feeding on it, but constantly in opposition, just like Irminsul and the Abyss in Teyvat. My own theory on this is that Irminsul is some kind of imitation of the original imaginary tree, and if its roots go down into the Abyss, then that means that the Abyss is Genshin's Sea of Quanta. If forbidden knowledge comes from the Abyss and is related to as alien knowledge from outside of the world, that also lends credence to the theory that Teyvat is some kind of advanced bubble universe. It seems almost like someone tried to recreate the entirety of the known universe inside of a bubble, by including the imaginary tree and Sea of Quanta, but they have limitations and unforeseen problems like forbidden knowledge, some kind of corruption or infection that the real imaginary tree and sea do not seem to have. Another wild possibility is that Teyvat is somehow created around the imaginary tree and the Sea of Quanta themselves, maybe sometime in the far-flung future of the Honkai universe, but that gets a little weird because anyone who comes into direct contact with the tree dies. Kind of. This is an auto-apocalypse thing, and I still do not 100% understand auto-apocalypse. Future me, speaking of the Sea of Quanta, actually finished the Thus Spoke Apocalypse story and learned something extremely important, and at least somewhat relevant. This is the one place in Honkai so far where I've seen very familiar language akin to what comes up in Genshin over and over, especially in our more recent story bits. Here, the concept of the will of Honkai as a god in the truest sense is put forward, and the idea of Herschers, specifically in this case the first Herrscher, the Herrscher of Reason, a being made up of 300,000 souls, which is a burden and title passed down to Bronya, being this: the conviction that humanity can fight the Honkai, the conviction that humanity can fight against the gods. To neither give in to Honkai nor kowtow to the gods, this is our unanimous thought. This is very familiar repeating sentiment among the smoldering ruins of various different civilizations scattered throughout Teyvat. This knowledge makes me even more inclined to believe that the god or gods of Celestia are not simply misunderstood, but are likely tied directly to the will of Honkai. If we look at it this way, either Celestia is, in some way, or shape or form, run by the will of Honkai, or it is run by someone desperately trying to keep the eyes of the will of Honkai off of Teyvat, which unfortunately ends in forcing them to take the exact same genocidal actions that Honkai would have enacted on its own anyway. Either of these possibilities are fascinating and honestly fit into the lore just fine. I've seen so many people consider any of these theories outlandish, but if you call this outlandish, that just tells me you've not experienced the full scope of the wild extremes the writers are willing to go to just in the main stories of this game alone. There are also several visual parallels between what we know as the Abyss in Genshin and the Sea of Quanta, with this space appearing in Auto Apocalypse's last stand as he approached the imaginary tree, as well as in recent chapters with Li Sushang and Durandal traversing the same space. Moths and Project Ark. A good chunk of Honkai's lore comes from a time period called the Previous Era. This was the highly technologically advanced human civilization that existed on Earth 50,000 years prior to the start of the game's story. Humanity advanced quickly, and that triggered Honkai to emerge in the attempt to suppress its growth and test it. The humans of 50,000 years ago put up a long and valiant fight, but were eventually defeated, only a handful managing to survive the arrival of the final Hersher that reduced the Earth's surface to endless deserts ravaged by Honkai radiation. This was managed by a last-ditch effort involving hibernation pods and the last few surviving flame chasers from the organization known as Moths. They set up multiple long-running projects aimed at finding a way to either neutralize or escape the Honkai threat. This included Project Ark, which I'll come back to later, Project Stigma, and Project Veluca. The Moths organization were the first people to learn how to use Honkai energy themselves, and in part, use Honkai-related things to fight back against the Honkai. One of the things they developed in order to do this was known as metamorph surgery, and the people who survived this low-success, grueling procedure to be fused with Honkai beasts became known as mantises. After an event known as the Tragedy of Binding, the losses humanity suffered were so great that only 13 mantises remained. This was when Elysia formed the Flame Chasers out of who was left, despite Moth not wanting to give them official backing, due to the fact that some of them were not what one would consider morally good or heroic people. Project Ark was a spacefaring vessel created by the Flame Chaser Vilvi that contained the entirety of the human genome. Though its abilities and functions are never gone into in depth, it's widely assumed that the ship itself had some level of terraforming abilities, and likely the ability to clone and birth fresh humans from the storage of that human genome when it was ready. The whole thing was set up to be manned by the flame chaser Cosma. It is implied by recent information, however, that at the last moment, as the world turned to dust under the final Hersher's attack, Cosma and Griseo, the painting with unfathomable abilities of creation, switched places. Unfortunately, the Ark seems to have lost all contact with Earth and has fallen silent in the current era, and thus the surviving flame chasers and the de facto leader of the last few consider it a failure. I think that it's absolutely silly to write off though, and it has Chekhov's gun written all over it. It's widely believed that nowhere in the universe or any parallel one is safe from the reach of Honkai, and Sue later corroborates this. But Griseo left to search the Sea of Stars for such a place all the same. It is very likely, in my opinion, that Griseo is at least in some way or form responsible for the literal birth of Teyvat. She could be, after countless years of traveling the cosmos, literally Teyvat's primordial one. Though it's never stated what type of Honkai beast her mantis surgery fused her with, many of her skills and motifs involve references to birds and flight. One of the paintings you can check as her unlockable files in the Elysian realms is of a bird in a cage. It states that she does not know if she is the bird or the cage. She is also shown in a recent event to have specifically brought 4 paintings to life to aid her in her quests and the act of creation, which mirrors the act of the arrival of the primordial one in Teyvat splitting itself into 4 shades. It's not that far of a stretch to assume that 50,000 some odd years alone in a spaceship could cause her and her powers to evolve into something beyond even that of a mantis, and even a typical mantis would seem godlike next to a normal primitive human just freshly hatched. Another case I'd like to make in favor of this is the fact that I've long suspected that Mona's domain in the second Golden Apple Archipelago questline showed a glimpse of the true sky, as astrologists see it. Mona mentioned that astrologers are taught to look past the false sky when they scry, and it very closely resembles both Van Gogh's Starry Night and the style with which Griseo has been shown to paint the sky. Griseo is a strange and still very mysterious character even after examining all of her data files. While she has the delicate nature of a young girl, there's something about her that radiates a dark danger. She is inevitably stained, by other people's presence to the point where the other flame chasers warn against spending too much time with her at any given moment, regardless of who you are or what your intentions are. The power her paintings possess is said to have nearly completely destroyed a city when she decided on a whim to paint one of the more aggressive and morally ambiguous flame chasers, Kalpus. Arguably, she remains one of the most mysterious out of the 13. Anyway, suffice it to say, I think that Project Arc has the most obvious connection to Tevat, as we know it. Tevat is literally the Hebrew word for arc, and Before Sun and Moon's recollection of the beginning of the world references this story more than once. If the majority of the creation of Tevat did end up in the hands of little Griseo, some several thousand years into her starfaring journey, then, honestly, all of the iconography, the similarities, the feeling that everywhere we look there's a flame chaser or Elysian Realm specific visual reference or similarity makes a lot of sense. This girl was raised almost exclusively with and around and by the flame chasers and Moth's personnel. They were her entire world. It would make perfect sense for them to appear throughout her creation, her grandest painting yet. I'll touch more on some of Honkai's biblical references leading into Tevat when we get to discussing the Elysian Realm, but first I want to talk about Su. Project Veluca and the Seed of Sumeru. Using the second divine key, Cosmic Juggernaut, Su was tasked with searching through the endless sea of quanta in the hopes of finding any universe of any kind that had managed to defeat or stop or even just escape the Honkai threat. Despite spending 50,000 years in this deep meditation, he failed to do so. This suggests that no world has managed to escape the encroaching effects of Honkai. The Seed of Sumeru itself is a bubble universe that Su created for himself to exist in while he undertook this daunting feat. This is a very interesting jumping off point, as we can consider its name to be a direct connection to the world of Genshin Impact, but how and why? Until more of Honkai's current main storyline resolves, it'll be hard to tell for sure. Su gave up his long vigil after encountering the Valkyrie Durandal, also known as Bianca Ategina, or more accurately Bianca Castellana. It's complicated. He passed the Seed of Sumeru onto her, and she now contains this entire bubble universe within herself and her special battlesuit. The other most obvious and strange connection here is that Su is, while having softer features and longer hair, nearly identical to Alhaitham, though his eyes' colors are more or less inverted. Rather than Alhaitham's green with pinkish-red pupils, his eyes are pinkish-red and sometimes depicted with a green to teal pupil. They are also voiced by the same Chinese voice actor, which is usually reserved for very pointed connections. Rumor has it that the only reason this didn't carry over to his Japanese seiyuu was due to him being ill at the time. That is to say, the devs want us to connect Alhaitham and Su. But to what end? How does the existence of the bubble universe known as the Seed of Sumeru connect to Tevat? Why use the same name if not intentionally? Su makes many references and spins many analogies using Sanskrit words and concepts and beliefs related to Buddhism, which appear often in the Sumeru Lake of Genshin Impact's main storyline as well. At the very end of Su's duty, he allows himself to sink into the Sea of Quanta, presumably with the intent of letting go and finally passing on after 50,000 years. This is left as a bit of a cliffhanger, however, as he suddenly finds himself in some strange other space, which he seems to recognize in some way or another, as he says, "This place really exists after all," where he is promptly engaged in a game of chess, or a similar board game, by an otherworldly being. This is the last we see or know of him, and the outcome of that moment is completely unknown. At the end of the day, this little segment is one that really sticks out to me. In the recent 3.0 Archon quests, we learned that the root of the Dendro element is none other than Irminsul itself. That Sumeru is supposedly physically related to the true location of Irminsul, still said to be deep within the earth. True literal location is yet unconfirmed, as the Irminsuls we have visited are dreamscapes, not unlike Honkai Stigmascapes, but that's another long tangent. There are simply too many connections to Genshin's Land of Sumeru, even the use of the word Veluca, Alhaitham's near-perfect resemblance of Su himself, etc., to ignore. What it all means is honestly anyone's guess. Could Tevat itself be carved out of the Seed of Sumeru, the universe that Su created? It's not impossible, honestly, thinking about how Sumeru itself could almost be considered the center of the world that is Tevat, Irminsul serving as its central pillar or anchor. Could Griseo somehow have come across this universe in her travels despite its literal location being in the far future and likely still being in Durandal's possession? There's definitely something there, but we don't have enough to go on to tease out something concrete just yet. Maybe soon. The Elysian Realm. Now, picture this. At the end of your arduous journey for the truth, it all boils down to you standing before a man on a throne. Despite his youthful appearance, you know that he is ancient beyond comprehension. Even 1,000 years is more than a normal human mind could possibly handle. But 50,000? That is how long this man has desperately tried to protect this world from the shadows. You can feel the weight of those years in his icy blue eyes as he gazes down on you, placid in his silent fury, in the unspoken madness that those countless years have wrought in his mind. You came to him with questions. What is the World Serpent Organization? Who founded it really? What is its true purpose, and what is Project Stigma? What is the will of Honkai? This man, the Ancient of Days, simply steps aside and motions for you to go beyond this throne, into a dark and narrow hallway. Here lies the Elysian Realm, the record of the truth, the record that will show you a faithful recreation of the end of the world. Okay, dramatic fanfare aside, at least the Elysian Realm is easy to explain, on the surface. It's a classic sci-fi trope, the idea that humans might be able to subvert death by uploading their consciousness as data in some future scenario where quantum computers are a thing and algorithms are complex enough to perfectly replicate the human brain. This has been an idea that has fascinated the masses since the earliest days of science fiction as a genre. The Elysian Realm is just such a thing, a place within data where the 13 Flame Chasers, humanity's last heroes before its complete annihilation 50,000 years before the current Honkai Impact 3rd main story, have stored their memories and consciousness. Here, they offer trials to a new era of heroes and pass on their signets of power to those they deem worthy. They preserve the last memories of a world about to be completely wiped out. The things in the Elysian Realm that really get me are mostly visual, honestly. After playing through the entirety of the rather bulky Elysian Realm main story, I came out of it convinced that the Flame Chasers, or maybe more accurately, a single Flame Chaser, has to have had something to do with Tevat's conception and creation. There's just no two ways around it. The Elysian Realm is dripping in symbolism and visual references that are just too similar to ignore. It's as if some leftover data somewhere got put into a blender and the World Serpent Organization's religious deification of the Flame Chasers got dumped in somehow, and that's how baby Tevat was born. Obviously, this isn't a solid or serious theory, it's just my observation of the visual thematics as well as the character types of the Flame Chasers themselves. And with the way Hoyoverse does storytelling, purposely leaving literary puzzles unsolved so that we players can make our own conclusions, I'm honestly constantly scratching my head over this one. What conclusion are we meant to draw? I think about the chapter preview trailer often. I think it's something we shouldn't forget in lieu of more recent lore bomb drops. I think of Dane's opening dialogue. This war is just the continuation of previous battles. Not only Tevat, but the universe, at the mercy of this higher being known as Honkai, are trapped in an endless samsara. If I stopped to fully explain each of these points, we'd really be here long enough for Honkai to reset our civilization to dust, so I'm going to stick with this simple overview I've given and do a bit of a rapid-fire cover of some of the Elysian Realm's most blatant parallels, plus some of the many thoughts I've had. Many of the Flame Chasers have their own realm within the realm, be it as complex as Aponia or Griseo's, or at the very least a recurring place where you can find them, such as Pardofelis' shop or Vilvi's workshop in the Golden Courtyard. There's the area that resembles an Adeptus' abode from Liyue, the Twilight Woods, that even features a big tree that very closely resembles the withered white trees of domains in Genshin. Generally, this area is associated with Su and Fuhua, the space known as the Last Grave that looks like something out of the most corrupted part of the Abyss. Mobius's Lightless Land also bears similarity to some of the basic domains. The Forgotten City resembles a strange, abstract Inazuma, but the most interesting, in my opinion, is Aponia's realm, known as the Deepest Doorway, which is an interesting way to name it because it appears to be floating in the sky above the clouds. The visual references are pretty apparent. I even happen to note that the central platform you fight on has specifically 7 pillars on one side. Not repeated, not part of a larger motif, just there. With so many things relating back to the desert these days, Deshret's 7 pillars, 7 monk kings, the 7 archons, etc., I noticed them right away. We also continue to see the 8-pointed star that is a symbol of Conria that I've started spotting everywhere in Genshin here on the platform. Even the shadow of the place from above, projected down onto the clouds, is reminiscent of some of the views of Celestia that can be seen now that it has a proper 3D model. What does it mean? Again, my only best guess is that somehow this data, perhaps a backup that Mobius or Vilvi ferreted away somewhere, or Griseo's memories, are part of the literal building blocks for Tevat, in Elysia's personal memory space preserved by Eponia's psychic powers. The emblem that serves as a kind of flag and symbol for the whole of the place is almost identical to the storybook representation of the kingdom in the heavens in the Battle Pass trailer. This too has stuck in my brain since the first moment I saw it. They're just too similar to ignore. Eponia herself bears a striking resemblance to the Welkin Moon lady person, well, the art for it. The Flame Chasers all have designations that represent their role in the organization. Eden, the diva turned super soldier, has the designation Gold. There's not much else here to go on, and Eden herself doesn't strike me as Rhine-daughter-like, though I could be missing something. I just find the specific use of this interesting when the other designations are things like Deliverance, Vicissitude, and Decimation. Calpus, the bearer of the designation and signet of decimation, is obsessed with fighting to the point of actively wanting to kill most of his so-called comrades. He wears a mask and only Mobius and Kevin have ever seen what he looks like beneath it. The mask is very similar to Tartaglia's mask, only rendered in black and gold rather than red. Yai Sakura is the basis for Yai Miko's design. I think it's of note that she has a backstory that's similar to Genshin's Raiden A, her younger sister being a good deal of the character's motivation. Her designation is Setsuna. Setsuna is a Japanese word meaning a moment, an instant. The word came from a Buddhist term meaning split second, which was imported from the Chinese language but originated in India. It can also be given as a name, as is, or with different kanji. This likely has to do with her role as an assassin in the moth organization known as Cocoon. It's also, quite specifically, the measure of time we theory crafters most often associate with the Thousand Winds of Time, Istaroth. Griseo is, of course, another important one to mention. As I said earlier, she's the best candidate for our primordial one via Project Arc. Her designation and signet is, curiously, just stars. She is, in my opinion, one of the most mysterious flame chasers. Her parents were moth employees, so she had access to the mantis surgery that saved her life, but we know curiously less about her than even, say, Partophelis, who is considered the weakest flame chaser, who was just included by chance, as she happened to survive the tragedy leading up to the organization's formation. Mobius, the scientist responsible for the surgery that allowed the mantises to be created in the first place, has the signet and designation of Infinity. The symbol most associated with her is the same four-sided knot that appears on nearly every Conrian ruin in the Genshin overworld, as well as the hypostasis arenas and activation devices that usually open doors. She was a brilliant mind, unmatched in her time, and her capabilities and schemes are well beyond what the average person could even comprehend. The idea that Mobius also associated directly with the Ouroboros, which has significance to Delphi, the city that would become Enkanomia after its fall, is not lost on me. The people worshipped the Ouroboros, the imaginary serpent, long before the city sank beneath the waves. Dainsleif's character card claims his constellation as Snake Ring, which would be more aptly translated to Ouroboros in the Western lexicon. Some of her other motifs are also distinctly Conrian, but what we can tease out of that theory-wise is not very concrete. Personality-wise, she's extremely close to Dottore, almost to a frightening degree, though she did turn out to be a bit more sympathetic in the end. But there's definitely a connection there, and I am looking. I'd say with her being the mastermind she is, that any contingency plan coming out of the end was hers or Vilvi's doing, which brings us to Vilvi, whose signet is as mysterious as Griseo's, Helix. To me, this largely represents in my mind that the genius inventor was responsible for building Project Ark itself. She is the one who designed its systems and recorded the human genome for preservation and transport. Her signet is likely a direct representation of this. One of her rules of thumb stick out to me as well. She says she builds a back door into everything she's ever made, because none can predict whether their creations will turn on them. If humanity was created by a god, it wouldn't have known that humanity's greatest spirit is the spirit of defying its maker. This makes me really side-eye the Ark, honestly. That opens all kinds of cans of worms with regard to the early history of Teyvat. Cosma is a little less relevant in my opinion, but as a concept I think he's important. He started out as a vigilante, punishing evil as he saw fit. He dreamed of becoming a hero, but feels that he never achieved this. His designation is Daybreak. He sees his current form as something that is demonic and often self-deprecates. This feels like some small parallel with Diluc in my mind, though they don't really resemble each other aside from these things. It's also important to note that he was closest to Griseo and was her protector. If she was responsible for creating Teyvat, it'd make sense that Daybreak as a concept passing down through the ages to become the Dawn Knight might slip into her creation. Elysia herself is an interesting case, and I could talk about her alone for hours, but just in the sense of how she has any Genshin connection. Well, she is the original Hersher, the first one to ever exist that we know of, though this was kept secret and the designation is more often given to the Hersher of Reason, Welt Joyce. She was born naturally a Hersher and called herself the Hersher of Human. Unlike the others that came before her, instead of hatred for humanity, she loved humans so much that she could see the good even in people who were honestly pretty evil. Her Hersher of Ego unit is what interests me the most, as it bears a very familiar design motif. She wears the same triquetra that appears throughout Genshin as a chakra pendant, and marks enemies with that very same symbol in battle as part of her kit. She also has the same elf ears that Klee and Nahida have, which is an ongoing mystery in the world of Genshin. We know that Klee's race is long-lived, but we have no idea what race that is or where they come from and why. Honestly, I'm expecting Alice to be an Elysia XP when she finally appears, 100%. I will be shocked if she's not. Same playful but secretly aloof personality, hiding their true intentions and nature. Yeah. Now, I want to direct your attention to the bizarre book series that I covered in an audiobook not too long ago, Vera's Melancholy. While it's a fictional series and universe, I can't help but wonder if all of the answers are hidden within. The titular character lives in what she describes as a small country village named Delphi. This is Enkinomia's original name. The writer also mentions Greek myth in an author's note, which is absolutely bizarre. Greece doesn't exist in Teyvat. Greece is from Earth. It honestly makes me wonder if the author, now mysteriously missing, is a descender of some sort. I believe on the other side of the starry sea is a planet inhabited by gods who can answer all prayers and wishes, and everyone bearing a wish is on a journey to get there. I believe in our universe there is a world currently at war against Doomsday, where the noble and elegant souls of 14 Valkyries burn bright, if only for a brief but magnificent moment. This is a direct reference to the world of Honkai, though it seems to reference the number of recorded Hershers rather than the Valkyries. Many Valkyries are also Hershers. Interestingly enough, we could count 14 Hershers if we include Elysia as one, though we largely consider her Hersher 0, the Hersher of Origin. I wonder if the black-haired, multidimensional wizard in this story, Ike, is actually a reference to Welt Joyce. Honestly, this whole story feels like a tie-in for Honkai and Honkai Star Rail, but I thought it was interesting to note that we do have this level of precedence for referring back to what I believe is the origin of Teyvat, that doomed Earth now inhabited by Kiana and her comrades. Aponia and the Loom of Fate. When you first begin to encounter Aponia in the Elysian realm, the way she first addresses you gave me chills. You find yourself as Raiden Mei in a long corridor of white pillars that immediately made me think at least a little of the loading screen of Genshin Impact, but it's oppressively dark. As you make your way slowly down the seemingly endless path, her voice calls out to you saying, "Welcome, traveler from afar. I've got to say, this moment in the story is hard to top for me. It made me kind of lose it for a second. Nowhere else in Honkai does anyone address you so directly with the title Traveler. Normally it wouldn't really mean anything, but to us Genshin lore nerds, obviously, it means a lot. As if some shadow of the future, of the world that would be, was looking back at you through the veil of space and time. And then, at the very end of that ominous dark hallway, is a massive wall of prison bars, a jail cell. Behind the locked door, Epona sits alone, motionless in a single chair, the only light in the area her folded, luminescent butterfly wings. Epona, the flame chaser whose designation is discipline, is a powerful psychic-type mantis with the ability to exert extreme autosuggestion on people as well as see their fates. If she imposes a discipline on someone, the command to live was used as an example. Their survival instinct and ability to heal and survive mortal wounds would go above and beyond the human limit. She is shown to easily be able to command others to do as she wishes. Her ability to see the fates of others is depicted as rather tragic. She can see what's coming, but neither she nor those she warns can ever change the final outcome. This mirrors what the disembodied voice at the end of the Inversion of Genesis quest said to us. Remember Paimon and the broken vase? The real meaning of what this mysterious voice said was this, that even though the memories in Irminsul were altered and in a perceived sense, so was Scaramouche's fate, in reality, nothing changed. The outcome was the same in the end. It was only the way in which the other people in the world began to perceive the event that had changed. The other thing of note here is that Epona sees fate as many threads that intersect. She can follow them and make out a bigger picture, kind of like a tapestry on a loom. This parallels Genshin's theme of fate, suggesting that in both universes, fate is not easy even for a god to alter. Her connection to blue morpho butterflies is something I noted and instantly recalled. The only case I can remember seeing one in Genshin is in Albedo's character demo. Does it have any significance? Only time will tell. Epona and Sue's psychic powers were the foundation for the Elysian realm itself. Epona is the reason that the Elysian realm can exist as it does. She fused with the data, meaning that her soul is the literal groundwork that holds the realm together. She did this in this specific way in order to preserve Elysium Everlasting, a memory space based entirely on Elysia's life. Elysia was the only person whose fate Epona could not divine no matter how hard she tried. This is interesting in regard to this Loom of Fate concept that comes up in Genshin as well. We find out in later chapters that when Elysia died, Epona lost her ability to see fate entirely. It is heavily implied that Elysia's true identity as the Herrscher of Ego, or human, as she called herself, completely severed this idea of predetermination. If the two games do in fact exist in the same larger universe as is heavily implied, what implications does this have for Teyvat, I wonder? Epona was Griseo's mother figure, and if my theory about Griseo is correct, then I imagine that her memory would play a big role in anything Griseo created. The Mark of Finality. The current storyline in Honkai Impact is following Kevin Kaslana, one of the last two remaining Flame Chasers' last stand. He initiated Project Stigma, the last plan the Moths had for stopping Honkai and preserving humanity. This involves locking the Earth in an eternal dream. Humanity as it is will eventually cease to exist entirely, with only beings known as forms, born from stigmas to carry on the human legacy. This will eventually form one large human subconscious, a godlike being that mirrors and matches the will of Honkai, and therefore stop the Honkai, technically, maybe. Either way, it's an extreme that the main protagonists are unable to allow. In order to execute this plan, Kevin has taken the authority of the Herrscher of the End that was responsible for destroying his world. The final reset that appears after the Honkai has tried many other ways to force humanity's evolution. He has become the Herrscher of Finality in all but name, and in doing so, revealed his mantis form. All Flame Chasers could unleash their Honkai beasts like this, changing their physical form, but it is considered a last resort as it is often difficult to remain in control when this is done. When Kevin became this pseudo-Hersher of finality, a very familiar mark appeared on his brow, which has been identified as and called specifically the Mark of Finality. The first time I saw this was a very, record scratch moment. Kevin suddenly looks a hell of a lot like Paimon if Paimon was, buff and scary. I'd also like to point out that his form undeniably resembles that of a dragon. Honestly, it brings to mind Dvalin if he was, stretched and smooshed into a human form. Does anybody remember when human versions of Pokemon were really popular on, DeviantArt back in the day? Yeah. Kevin's new form just looks like a Dvalin Gajinka, but why? This symbol, the Mark of Finality, is literally everywhere in Genshin Impact, from the Traveler to Albedo to Paimon's little hair ornament. It's just a little four-pointed star. It's just a design element, at least that's what everyone said until the developers gave it a name. Kaya's gloves, the pupils of every native Conrian, Bennett's belt, the blood splatter on Diluc's face in the webtoon. What does it mean? This is eating me alive, honestly. I'm hoping the next chapter in Honkai will give me some answers, but I'm not super hopeful. I can't stop thinking about how Finality's domain is that of time, and we all know how much talking about Genshin's God of Time can have us theory crafters chasing our own tails. So, we talked about Finality earlier, and how it is the will of Honkai. Civilizations rise and fall, and are tested and pruned as the will of Honkai seeks to force their evolution so that it can assimilate it. Does this mean that this continues in Teyvat? That the cyclical nature of Teyvat is the same system that governs the world of Honkai Impact? I think that is exactly the answer, though we still have so many questions to answer on the way to that conclusion. Project Arc sought a place that was free from the grasp of Finality and the Honkai. So, knowing all of this that I've covered, I feel we can finally put together a theory that's mostly cohesive, starting with the birth of Teyvat. We know that the Primordial One came to Teyvat and terraformed the Light Realm that was pure elemental energy, the realm of the Bishops, into something that humans could live in. I think that perhaps the existence of these specific elemental energy flows have something to do with why the pilot of the Ark chose Teyvat in the first place. While back in the Honkai world, there are no elemental divisions of energy, just Honkai energy converted for human use. For gameplay purposes, plenty of units do have elemental affinities, but it's not gone into in-depth lore-wise. Perhaps a world that had this unique energy force was a beneficial choice, as they would not be relying on Honkai energy. Maybe this specific balance of elemental energy types can be used to insulate from or deflect Honkai energy. That said, elemental energy could just be Honkai energy broken down into categories. Either could be true. Before Sun and Moon says that humans were the Primordial One's most beloved creation, and that it made the world in preparation for their coming. I think back to how the Flame Chasers had to be careful to regulate Griseo's personality from being stained by those around her. I think about Alicia, the Hersher of human and origin who loved humans more than anything, and wonder if it was her color that stayed on Griseo the most as she traversed the stars. When she finally found a place that was suitable enough to give life a shot, perhaps she used Vilvi's Ark to shape that world into one that the new humans that the Ark's facilities would birth could exist in. And everything went to plan, for once. Everything was good and beautiful. The first humans as recorded in Before Sun and Moon were happy, and there was abundance. But then something happened, something catastrophic. Even Su, who became nearly omniscient in his 50,000-year vigil of countless universes, said that there was no place, no bubble universe, no partition that the Honkai could not breach. The second who came was an alien life form that intruded onto Teyvat. It is directly recorded that this being brought with them war, monsters, and plagues, all things that Honkai manifests as. The Primordial One and its shades, likely Griseo and her paintings forged to aid in her work, went to war against this usurper, but all evidence we have points to the second who came coming out as the winner. I wonder if the second who came has anything to do with a newer concept introduced into the Honkai universe, the Sky People, a race of humanoids who learned to fight the Honkai by becoming the Honkai. They've modified their bodies so extremely that they no longer appear human save for a few of the stronger bosses. They absorb and eat Honkai energy faster than Honkai can manifest and kill them, but in doing so they have become the Honkai themselves. They go from world to world seeking civilizations that have risen enough to trigger the Honkai reaction in order to plunder their energy and then destroy that civilization that they've just drained in order to hide their presence in the greater universe. I'd like to postulate a different ending to this commonly questioned theory about the two thrones of heaven. That Tevat's cyclical rise and fall is something of a compromise reached in order to preserve the newly born humanity. Honkai came to the new world Griseo had recreated at the end of her journey, despite everyone's best efforts. We can even look directly at the sustainer of heavenly principles, who clearly resembles a Hersher, one that we know intimately from the beginning of Honkai Impact. Perhaps the state of Tevat is what it is so that the Honkai never fully destroys this last remnant of that lost era of humanity. The first throne and the second throne perhaps came to an accord. Back in the Honkai universe, Project Ember was a plan put into place by the humans of the previous era to aid the new humans that would emerge after their obliteration in the fight against the Honkai. They would provide the records of their great civilization and technology to the new humans, thus giving them an edge in the coming battle. Of course, this had the worst possible effect, causing Honkai to manifest quickly. The attacks against humanity were more vicious and more powerful than any the early people of the previous era had ever witnessed. This also brings to mind the concept of the Seelie race, an elder race tasked with guiding and helping humanity along its way. The Ark was still receiving and sending regular updates back to Earth by the time this had come to pass, if I recall correctly. So perhaps Griseo took this information and decided that if humanity was kept at a point of development not unlike medieval Earth, they would manage to avoid triggering the Honkai. Of course, mortal arrogation never ceases. Now, this also leaves us with many questions. What's with the gods? Why are there gods? Obviously, we can assume the gods of Celestia are one thing, created by the primordial one to enforce this rule, ironically making themselves into the very thing that they sought to stop. Celestia's mandate of forbidden knowledge has them playing the role of Honkai in order to stop Honkai from rising. It's kind of a brilliant, heart-rending story to tell if that is in fact the case. Now, the other beings such as Adepta and Yokai, I believe that these are remnants of the original races of Tevat from the time of the 7 Dragon Lords that originally ruled the planet. The current gods, who are largely non-human beings, are of these lineages. When it comes to conquering, this sort of thing is not unheard of or even rare. Those that side with the invaders being handed power over their brethren is something that happens time and time again in real Earth history. Another thought. The reason so many characters in Genshin resemble characters from the Honkai universe, at least as an in-lore explanation, would be that their DNA was preserved in Vilvi's Project Art. So far, most of the characters that are arguably Honkai XPs resemble characters that are from the previous era or had incarnations in the previous era. Therefore, they would be in that database. The only outlier is how Nahida resembles Teresa Apocalypse, but I think there's plenty of reason for a Kaslana lookalike to appear, since Kevin's data is probably preserved in the Ark anyway. Obviously, this is very much so just a theory, but it's one that makes sense to me. Even though there are still so many questions, why is Irminsul almost identical to the imaginary tree? Is the Abyss the Sea of Quanta? Are they smaller scale imitations of the former? I could go on, but I think I've dithered in my own thoughts about this long enough. Rapid fire round, or a list of things that made me think. Cecilia, Kiana's mother, was the wielder of the Abyssal Key before Durandal inherited it, and seems to lend her name to the flowers that grow on Starsnatch Cliff in Mondstadt. Interestingly enough, the flowers associated with the Abyssal Key are identical to the field of Tevat flowers shown in the Tevat chapter preview trailer. Stigma, plural stigmata, colloquially known as a witch mark or cursed mark, is a design that forms on the skin as a visual indicator that this human has mutated to allow for Honkai adaptability. The first stigmata were created by Dr. May and Dr. Mobius during the previous era. In the Seed of Humanity project, the genome for stigmata was implanted in many women that were headed for the cryosleep, so their current era descendants would have the potential to develop natural stigmata to help them resist the Honkai threat. This makes me think of the mysterious term allogene, and it seems to match somewhat with how few people in the world of Tevat ever receive visions. True stigmata are the ones found upon chosen humans who have the potential to become a Hersher. They originate from the Honkai god or will of Honkai. A true stigma acts like a visual marker but can cause pain and emotional instability at high concentrations of Honkai energy. Aponia and the Welkin Moon. The idea of Griseo being the primordial one kind of makes this even more interesting, as Aponia was her mother figure after her parents died, and mother is God in the eyes of a child. Scaramouche Boss's moveset and Hersher of the Void. Elves and Paimon. Elves are both a gameplay mechanic and something lore-wise that are very interesting. Alicia's elf bears a shocking resemblance to Paimon, and all of the elves are shaped like her. They're mechanical beings in nature, and Alicia's is the administrator of a data archive. Don't forget that early Paimon designs included a staff. The symbol of Elysium Eternal and the Battle Pass Kingdom. Yeah, I keep coming back to this because it's honestly just shocking. I think when we finally have the answers to this particular riddle, we will also know where the twins came from. I think the two things are intrinsically related. Albedo's splash screen art and the Hersher of the End annihilating the world. Moth's logo and La Signora. The Fatui symbol in the Theater of Domination. The flying manta rays, Dreams, Enkinomia, and Alicia? And now, a bonus, the XBs, Raiden, Yai, Himeko, Su, etc. Venti is based on Wendy, the Hersher of Wind. Zhongli might even be a Welt Yang XB. Raiden A and Raiden Mei even share the same voice actors, both in Chinese and Japanese. Same with Nahida and Teresa Apocalypse, and Yai Miko and Yai Sakura. This is also true with Alhaitham and Su, save for the Japanese voice actor, which is different due to him being ill at the time of recording. Cloud Retainer and Fu Hua. Ayato shares the same voice as Auto Apocalypse, but in my opinion has no other real similarities. If anyone is a visual XP of Auto, I think it's Daneslave, and Auto's entire character arc is him living 500 years obsessed with the person he loved and lost, so that's... oof, ouch, pain. Murata, Himeko, and Diluc. Okay, this one gets on my nerves. Diluc is obviously a gender bend of Himeko in the same way Venti is of Wendy. People keep bringing up the Pyro Archon, but we have absolutely no confirmation that the Pyro Archon will be named Murata in-game. Yes, I know it's in the manga, but the manga has done some very dubious things that have already been retconned, and this is a very, very much I'll believe it when I see it scenario. If they put another Himeko XP in the game, she'd literally get confused with Diluc. Just look at her. Not to mention, it would be a bizarre and nonsensical choice to name the Pyro Archon of Natlan, based on Mesoamerica as far as we can tell, Murata, an obviously Japanese name. These may have no real overbearing significance other than being fun, but I think they hint at the overall theme of reincarnation simply being a thing that exists in this universe. I've had some really shocked comments that don't understand what I mean or claim to see no reason why I should infer that this is a mechanic in the Hoyu-verse. But I think it's a disconnect in a cultural way. Reincarnation as a simple, often very mundane thing is baked into many Southeast Asian cultures, so of course it bleeds into Southeast Asian media in the same way the West's culturally Christian beliefs about good and evil end up baked into Western media. In many sects of Buddhism, reincarnation is so mundane that most of the time it's not considered as important at all. Acknowledged as a thing that happens, maybe a reason why you are the way you are, but not as important as your current incarnation. In conclusion, I believe that Genshin Impact continues to tell the same story that Honkai does. While we can't be 100% sure of how the world of Teyvat was formed or in what state it exists, be it a bubble universe or even a simulated space like the Elysian Realm, we see the same story start to take shape. Humanity is trapped in an endless samsara driven by a fate that they cannot control. While Elysia seems to have somehow managed to sever the chains of fate that bind the main characters in the Honkai storyline, does that ring true for our protagonists in Genshin? Both narratives tell the story of humanity, doomed to rise and fall and rise again at the whim of some greater being, and the struggle of the people living inside of this Gnostic-style prison fighting against that fate with all of their might. As much as my latest endeavors have made me think about these two incredibly deep, well-woven stories, it also made me stop and think about how heated people get about theories of these worlds being intrinsically interconnected. Personally, I think it comes from a deep-seated fear of the unknown more than anything. For a lot of people, Teyvat is a comfortable fantasy world with characters they feel deep personal attachments to, and that's entirely valid. I'm the same. But when these theories come in, they often end at scary drop-off points. Teyvat's a far, far future Honkai world. Tevat's a prison made by the Honkai universe's version of the Demiurge. Tevat's just a simulation like the Elysian realm, so nothing matters, and I'd rather eat my hat than have that be true. But wait, that's the thing about the Elysian realm. We knew from the beginning that it was only a simulation. The game almost encourages you to sit there and tell yourself, oh, whatever, nothing here matters. All of these people died 50,000 years ago, and I don't have to care about their simulated AI bots. But in the end, is that really how you feel coming out of the Elysian realm? Stories like these are meant to shake you. They're meant to take you to that place where you're uncomfortable, where you stubbornly huff and say, this doesn't matter, so I don't care. But then you find yourself nudged out of that place and you swear that it's built on logic. A good story will challenge you and push you to broaden your horizons and interrogate even your deepest held beliefs. Are they good? Are they kind? Are they true? At the end you ask yourself, so what if it is just a simulation? This is the last echo, the last impression of the heroes of the past. They gave everything so that the humans in the Honkai universe might have a future. I choose to care. I choose to see their humanity and their worth as they have recognized mine through the avatar of Raiden Mei in the story. If any of these theories suggesting that Tevat is a derivative, a result, something left over from the Honkai universe turn out to be true, that doesn't have to cheapen it at all. The only thing cheapening that experience of encountering Tevat is the person who decides themselves to discount its worth on account of its origins. In short, if that makes the world of Genshin Impact feel lesser to you, that's a you problem. Anyway, on this entirely different tangent than usual, I hope you allow stories to nudge you out of your comfort zone, to test your limits, and help you evolve as a person. Totally not sponsored by the Cocoon of Finality, I promise. At the end of the day, these connections might mean nothing, but I think otherwise. I want to believe. The wider universe creates a wild, beautiful, thriving, living world that has its own rules. I think that the story of Genshin Impact, Honkai Impact, and the greater Hoyoverse only stand to be enriched by these subtle connections. Anyway, I hope that my own personal journey down the rabbit hole that is Honkai Impact has given you all some new things to think about. This dive is by no means perfect, and I know I got rambly or off track at points, but I hope it was enough to interest you all the same. If you want to better understand Honkai lore, go check out Homu Lab's videos for nice succinct breakdowns. Thanks again for watching. This is, as always, the Hexen Zircle signing off for now. I hope you'll join us on our next adventure. May we fight for all that is beautiful in the world.